if the home is assembled in old ways that isn't taking into consideration what's super important for that healthy environment.
Yeah, absolutely. It was a great question. I've never had anyone really ask that question, nor even really ask myself that question. We were in a very odd situation, very young. And I think it is just the assumption you're clueless.
Yeah.
And you just assume, and it's not, the health is not at the forefront, especially back then. I can look back now, but then at the time, no, it was not even in our decision-making process at all. It was not a factor. It was a brand new home. And you do assume, I assumed, we did assume that you think you buy new, you're going to have less problems, at least in the beginning. I would say that's a fair assumption that we had.
Yeah. And then what I was thinking about this morning when I got up was I had posted a video, I think about a week ago, addressing federal guidelines.
Yeah.
And when you comment, what resonated with me is you had 3 people show up all saying, no, this is below acceptable levels. So that's not it.
Right.
And it took the 4th guy to go, yeah, it's below guidelines, but it's still not okay. And your husband his symptoms went away literally the next day. And so I think that Nate and I were literally just talking about before you pop back on. I think that there's this misguided trust in federal guidelines when health officials, especially in the naturopathic world, are like, no, that's not okay.
Right.
Look what's in our water. Some of the things are not even regulated, and other things are, like in an instance up here, 4,000 times higher than health guidelines, but federal guidelines say that it's okay.
Right. And I think, and that goes into, I mean, I go into this in my practice and some of my writings, is dosing and that variable. And when you go to science and medicine, that variable is important, especially when you want to like prove, correlate all of these things, right? And that's one thing, even now speaking to other doctors, like in my husband's case with the pulmonologist said, which was shocking to just hear it from a traditional standpoint, especially at a hospital that I worked at, was, don't go back into your home until you check it and clean it for mold. And we were already, we thought, exhausted those avenues. But you do, even when you look at it on medical journals and stuff like that, there's really not specific dosing that says, well, this amount is going to cause this or correlate, right? Then you get into those scientific things of legalities, and it was very confusing. But yeah, there's no dose, and we all experience, and we do know mold causes hypersensitivity, and we're all so uniquely made. And that's where I stand from, is that is going to look different for everybody. And so it just goes under that radar, right? Well, we think if it's below that, it'll be fine, but we have governors right now testing for different types of leads, arsenics, and plastics right now in our breads, baby formulas, candies, and in our water right now that Florida is doing. But it's right, you have these guidelines. Well, where does that health threshold come in?
Yeah.
Do those guidelines, and when does that health, right? What does that dose look like? I think I've only found a few articles specifically for aspergillus where they think around like 1,000 per 3,000. Then you get into like per particles and like amount, right? Per like, little bit that gets into your nose hairs, so that's something that's how do you prove that in science?
Right. Well, and we're so, like you mentioned, we're so biochemically different that what's going to affect me is not going to affect you. My wife is hypersensitive, and I am unaffected by most things. And we could literally go out to eat exactly the same foods. And if there was something in that, like a seed oil or something that just happened to be in whatever we ate, it's going to affect her drastically differently than my body will just roll with it, basically.
Right. and there's cross reactivities, and that's not really, talked about much, is like, you think about if pollen, an environmental, you know, organism that's out there that does, right? When you think about the AC condition and all of that, pollen season, it's been high here in Florida. It's seasonal, right? But we don't think about cross reactivities even in from foods, bananas, right? There's cross reactivities with these things.
Mhm.
And it's not educated enough. It's not marketed. It's, and when I even talk about that with people, and even when it gets down to makeup and their skincare, when everything is marketed as plant-based and all of this, and I've had a few patients where they didn't realize they were allergic to certain things in plant-based items. They're eating it in all different ways. So that can go, cross reactivity, but the hypersensitivity is so unique. So it's hard, I think, to even identify in a medical world and any other standpoint at this point, right? With environmental safety and all of that. It's like, well, what is too low? What's enough? What's too harmful? It'll be different for everyone. It'll show up differently. And then usually by the time it's showing up, and I think as we can now both attest for, unfortunately,
Mhm.
it is very different and it's too late.
Right. Right.
So where does that prevention come in with that threshold?
Yeah. I think it's how I interpret it, really, at least from myself, and how, we for our lifestyle, is your body keeps the score. Your body will tell you. So if you're looking for external validation, oh no, that says it's okay. Your body is going to tell you whether how you feel, your fogginess, your reaction, your energy. And so you've got to follow what your body is telling you, not some goofy guideline set
Right.
by people that I think at the end of the day, if you were really to sum it up to one thing, is no one values your health as a priority more than you.
Correct.
And until you take that internally and understand that, there's way too much information that is going to misguide you.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And with all this information and how you were just talking about and it's never really just one thing either. Like there's multiple sources of mold in these bacteria and environments. So it's hard to identify just even one thing, let alone when there's multitudes of things. We're exposed to this all day, everything. And it's never just going to be one of those things that causes it. We're all living with these multiple, highly systemic environments.
Yeah.
Is essentially what it comes down to. And I actually, one of the doctors that I trained under said it, the way he said it just nails it right on the head, is we're all just living organisms trying to coexist. But how do we now in today's world coexist where we're winning and surviving, though, not them?
Right. Yeah. No, that's good.
So
And it's so true. It's so true. And just like the conversations you and I are having, the conversations I have with people looking at our homes and the video we put out, it's just awareness.
yeah.
Just better questions get better results.
Well, I could only imagine, going back to the question you asked with, my husband and I buying this home. We're the only homeowners now going into our 12th year. We were young, having our first child, brand new, right in our marriage, careers just starting off. We just graduated college. We were in a unique situation. The people we were paying our rent to when we were in college and starting off these careers, they weren't paying the mortgage. So we got evicted.
Oh my gosh.
Yes. And it was like, oh my gosh, now we're pregnant, having a baby. My husband's a nurse and he works in cath labs with heart attacks. So it's like, okay, we have to be within 30 minutes of his new job. And it was crazy, but it was like, okay, brand new home. Now we understand why we probably got such a great deal. But if it was more marketed and available, educationally available, just out there, I think it would have helped, and definitely in a decision making, absolutely,
Yeah.
rather than living and going through it and then finding out with, oh, well, did we make the best choice?
Yeah. Well, the question was intriguing to me because you're in that world. You're in the health space. And if
Mhm.
there was any one person that would focus on that, it would be you and your husband. And you were still, for lack of a better term, duped by it's a brand new home. It's got to be healthy.
Yeah.
And so the average consumer who doesn't have that background is going to see it the same way, you know?
Right.
Yeah.
And we did, okay, we're going to get tested anyways. I even went past what I was being told and recommended, and I'll just pay out of pocket anyways. I'm going to get our home tested. So we still had this like conscious over time, like maybe we should start testing for this, even though it's a brand new home. But again, in our conversation of, oh, well, we live in Florida. This is really low. You know, we can tell you how to minimize things and everything, but you don't need like a full restoration. But then someone else would come and be like, you need a full restoration. And then it's like, well, don't listen to the scammers. And you're not allowed to say mold. You can only say bacteria. And then the confusion,
Yeah.
even as someone in the health field who's now advocating on that side, right? So you have these professionals and you're confused, and you already felt duped now once, twice. And yeah, and it was like, literally, if it wasn't for my husband's pulmonologist, he knew nothing that was going on. This wasn't something at the moment. We were just airing out. I wasn't even putting this out on my social media during the moment. A lot of people, even in my family, didn't even know what he was in ICU for.
Wow.
Like, you know, so this was very private matter. So the fact that this pulmonologist, that's how he discharged him. Don't go home. And thought we exhausted that. We already had it tested 3-4 times. Yeah. So the professionals, you know, then they start kind of pinning towards each other, like, well, don't trust him. Well, you need all these certifications, and like food organic certifications, right? Like,
Right.
do they matter? Do they not matter? I don't know. This guy said yes. This guy said no. And we were pulled around. So yeah, if it wasn't for that pulmonologist, I'm not even sure I would have even went back and revisited.
Wow. Yeah.
Even being health conscious and knowing something's not right. Something is still doesn't seem right. And I think, as we've discussed with your story, you can probably attest for that too. And I feel like that's the same narrative as well as with many of my patients, is you still know that just something's not right.
Yeah. 100%.
So it's this invisible, like these invisible conversations, these invisible mold almost is invisible. Some you can see, but not all of it, not
Yeah.
all of the environmental invaders, if you will. And
Yeah.
they do steal your energy. They want your oxygen. They want all that you have, that supply. They invade that. And eventually, by the time you're feeling it, you know.
Yeah. Then you end up in ICU like your husband. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So it's very interesting. Yeah. With you, meeting you, coming across, even with your platform and how you've been educating, it's like, wow, if I would have known this 12 years ago,
Yeah. Yeah.
if
Well,
people could build this way,
yeah.
who knows what our health could look like.
True. True. Yeah. And that's, I think, with your background, you kind of validate where we're coming from. And I appreciated, you reaching out and offering this because there's just so much gray in marketing, and our industry rewards by what photographs well, the counters, the appliances and all that on traditional assembly.
Yeah.
So people they get blinded by the emotion and the glitz of how things look when they walk in and don't even pay attention until it's too late.
Until it's too late. And I honestly don't, I don't think it's really at the forefront. I would say even most adults at this point. I don't think it's just young people. And, correct me if I'm wrong, or any viewers that do watch this, but even some of the patients, most of my patients were 30s and up. I had a few that were young. They're rare diseases, rare conditions, but most of them are older homeowners, right? And when I start going into their blueprint of precise actions that they need to take day by day, week by week, month by month, right?
Mhm.
A lot of it involved their environment.
Yeah.
And you say, okay, as someone who started out as a clinical exercise physiologist, nutritionist, right, wear all these hats, why now are you preaching about environment? Which I also have, a degree in public health, but they all connect. They're not separate.
Correct.
They are treated, sold, marketed, all in their own categories, but they shouldn't be. And part of your environment are the stressors.
Mm-hmm.
So it was a huge part of what I was doing, ended up coming down to the environment of the person.
Right.
It's a huge factor that's not addressed.
Yeah, no, I mean, 100%. And that's really the ethos behind what we're doing is you can't control the environment outdoors. You can't control the environment in your office, but what you can control and should control is the sanctuary, the environment of your home,
Right.
in your body, whether it's food and water, air. And this is what should be the priority of what we do actually control.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's what intrigues me with your work is, so take me through, you already had this existing. Did you just start researching, like building from the foundation up, like proper ventilation? Where did that start in your developmental enterprise, if you will? Like, what was that first step of, we're going to start looking at this when we build?
Right. So the genesis behind how I started looking at this was, it really goes back when we started building. I was selling real estate, and so early, I was 21. I just gravitated towards builders and developers. I was fascinated by the whole creativity of that industry. Piece of ground, trees on it, grass on it, whatever. And then it's a beautiful home that people move into and experience life.
Right.
And so I designed a plan. I hired a builder that I was actually marketing his homes.
Okay.
And he allowed me to kind of shadow and kind of learn the process, and really was mentored, if you will, in the traditional sense. Make it look nice. Here's the code minimums that we have to meet to get a permit, or not get a permit, but to get occupancy. And first couple homes went well. Then I developed a piece of property, and I had a large builder that I knew that said, hey, would you joint venture? And I know you're trying to get started in this. We'll show you our whole operation. I was like, that is super exciting to be able to see a big operation and how they function and how they operate. And again, same philosophy. And so we built it out, did very well. And then a few years go down the road, I get approached by this gentleman who worked for one of the energy programs that was spun off by the local utility, that their whole mission was to encourage builders to build more efficiently.
Okay.
So it was, and he wasn't just an ideologue with this utopian view of how homes should be built. He actually understood construction. And so he'd go, well, why don't you do this? It's going to cost you X dollars, but the benefit to the homeowner and the efficiency of the home is Y. I was, coming into the business, there's no one in my family that builds homes, grandfather, uncle, dad, whatever. So everything was new. It was like, I was inquisitive about everything that was new and different. So I was like, okay, I'll try that.
Right.
And
Okay.
a few years down the road, because of all these unique features we were adding, and to certify homes, you have to also follow best practices. You can't just assemble the old traditional way.
And that brings me to kind of your question when you were talking about the standards of health and right, how much mold compromises that is
Mhm.
kind of the same with fermenting is builders usually build like a bare minimum, barely what they can get by with, you
Yeah.
know? What is that standard of going above and beyond? Um,
Well, it's you kind of hit on a point. A friend of mine who is a builder here, he refers to code as barely legal. You miss one item and it's not legal to occupy. And it sounds like an exaggerated statement, but it's so true. And
yeah,
so, the next thing we know, we're building certified homes. We're watching our homeowner complaints drop. We're watching our warranty costs, post-close drop. Nothing connected to health and wellness. That journey to build a better home was purely focused on energy efficiency.
okay, yeah,
And so then 10 years ago, then I get sick, and my wife and I just dive deep into everything we can possibly learn about how I could get sick, because the premise there is I was never sick. I never missed a day of school growing up for being sick. I never missed a day of work. If I did get sick, it was a 2 or 3 ordeal, and boom, I was back on my feet and no problem. So for me to get that sick, it was like, how can this happen? I've been fit pretty much my whole life.
mhm.
But I think, like many people, you take your good health for granted. And so it was that deep
You
dive.
didn't realize you're healthy till like you're unhealthy, what that healthy felt like.
100%. And so it was that deep dive into learning about your terrain, your body's terrain, and how it is affected by the environment. And it was such an eye opener to me, and such a foreign concept. The water we drink, and what's the crap that's in the food that we're told is okay to eat.
Right.
And realizing so my wife and I basically had to dissect what can we control and what is out of our control.
Right. And was
Well,
that a lengthy process for you two, kind of going down that with, I assume, pretty much the two of you? It's not like you had like people telling you and helping you navigate this, but was that a long process for you guys kind of going through that?
and yes, it was. So like you and your husband, we were very private. I still have friends to this day that are angry with me that they had no idea through that entire journey I was sick, because we circled the wagons, other than my dad and my mom and my kids, no one knew what was going on.
Okay.
And so, but the journey of discovery, I don't think it was more than probably a handful of months to really start open my eyes going, holy cow. Because I was obsessed, and my wife was obsessed with reading everything we could get our hands on about what I had, how you could get this, how to heal non-traditionally.
Mhm.
I've watched family members go through the traditional methods and watched what the treatments did to them. And so it was this just incredible deep dive. And it was the conversation with my first doctor referring to the naturopathic journey as an experiment. And I could just use him as a backstop to check in and see how my blood work was doing.
Right.
And when asked, why don't you give any value to the research and the trials and all the data that shows that these other treatments work, without skipping a beat, he said, it's money. He goes, who do you think funds all of our research and promotes all of the medications that and the protocols that we encourage people to? It's a one size fits all. It's kind of like what you and I were talking about earlier. Our bodies are all so different. So one treatment does not work for all of us.
Right.
And so needless to say, I didn't go back to him a second time. But it was going through I just used my body as an experiment. I, went full keto, and my wife and I really can't tell you what it was that healed me 100%, because we tried everything.
Right.
And it was the combination of all the different things we experimented on me with. But if I can say there is one thing, is that we ate pure, we ate healthy, we ate, I only drank, purified water. I was so cognizant of everything that went into my body.
Yes.
And through that journey, I'm so in touch with my body now that if it's off, I immediately recognize that in my head, and I go, okay, what did I eat? Or where was I that could have affected that?
Right.
So through that, it's like, the saying is, you can't unsee once you see something, or you can't unknow what you know. And so because of the whole environmental education that I got and how it impacts us, just looking at our homes, it was like, I know too much now to just keep focusing on energy efficiency. I've got to focus on the environment.
Okay.
Because my wife asked me at one point, she goes, why do you do what you do? And I thought about it because no one had really asked me that before. And the response was, I appreciate and have so much enjoyment out of my little role in a family or a person's life. I know that structure is going to impact their world in some way, their life in some way, and who they sell it to and who they sell it to.
Right.
And with that love of what I do also comes great responsibility.
Yes.
If I know that what we call the invisible details that we put into the shell of the home impacts their livelihood, their health, their wellness, then I've got to take on that responsibility and embed those into the ethos of how we build our homes.
Well, and it really is, like you just said, invisible. Like you said, those invisible details, but just because it's invisible doesn't mean that it doesn't or shouldn't matter. So what's behind these walls that I entrusted a developer to build, right? Like you would think is just, well, of course it's going to be healthy. Why wouldn't it be?
Exactly.
And all whatever codes need, right? I mean, we found out that a lot of things weren't built to code and everything like that. We really went down, but and even on lab work and stuff like that, some of it can show up invisibly. So they're invisible details, and also how it even shows up in our body sometimes can seem invisible. Right? It's not just boom right there, and they're so microscopic. Even in lab work, it's not just right in your face. This is what it is.
Right.
You have to go on hunt, like you and your wife doing all these readings and stuff. And whether you're health conscious or not, we come from a very health conscious background, and even having that in the back of my forethought, it was still a challenge. It still didn't just come to light immediately right away. And it's those invisible details you just so clearly lined out that make a very impactful difference.
Yeah. Because even if it's an over $4 million build or a $400,000 build, the only difference, if it's assembled the same way, is the $4 million one has nicer finishes. It might be larger and a better community, but it's going to be just as unhealthy as that inexpensive home if those details aren't accounted for. And they're not sexy. And some of them don't even photograph well, if they photograph at all. But I tell everybody, I go, what's behind that sheetrock is actually a lot more important than what's in front of it, because you can always change a countertop. You can change your flooring. You can change your cabinets.
Right.
Going back in and tearing off sheetrock and air sealing correctly and doing all those things that create that healthy environment, it's got to be done during construction.
Absolutely. I'm translating everything that you're taking. I'm translating almost exactly to even just the human body as a shell and internally, right? Is again, going back to those invisible details, but taking the insides, and people can fix the outsides. We can lose weight and do things, but that doesn't necessarily mean the insides are necessarily functioning optimally, or healthily as someone may think,
Right.
and it may be silently going on for a very long time until, like we both expressed, it could be too late. So it's not something like a house. It may not be the most aesthetically thing, but it's most definitely going to be something that's going to impact the inside, if not today, most definitely long term.
Right. No, 100%. And so that's, when and I typically say quite often when I'm talking to people, and people like yourself that aren't even in our service area, if health and wellness is a top priority in your life,
right,
then asking those questions of your builder, and if they can't respond in a supportive and give you those actual steps that they're doing, they don't understand your values. They're building in a traditional way. And I don't think, and it's nothing disparaging against my peers, I just truly believe that builders, like consumers, don't know what they don't know. Most builders don't truly understand building science.
right,
Because our industry fights every single change in code. The NHB puts out propaganda every year with their lobbyists fighting Washington over various code updates.
yep,
But the code updates actually only focus, at least the IECC code updates that have gone in, aggressive here on the left coast, Washington, Oregon, and California, they're solely focused on energy.
right,
Health and wellness doesn't hardly even enter the room. And so, air sealing, yes, air exchanges are the requirement is dropping lower and lower. But it has a lot more to do with air management, because the home's getting tighter. If air isn't exchanging, we'll have the situation when our industry didn't understand building science in the 90s, and homes were rotting from the inside because they weren't managing airflow.
I feel like that's Florida right now.
And in high humidity climates like that, you really have to be focused, working with a builder that understands the climate that you're in. So here in the Portland Metro, Vancouver Metro area, we really build in 3 climates. So we're building on the Oregon coast. We do have higher humidity levels there.
Okay.
High winds, high moisture. So we have a very, so we have a very separate set of building specs that are specific to the Oregon coast. Then we have our building specs for here. If we go north, we go east, extremely dry. And we have, like in Arizona, well, not as dry as Arizona, but you go to a dry climate. Now you're adjusting for, especially that direction, extreme snow loads in the wintertime, high winds. You get into the dry climates. Now you're either in a dry climate, you're humidifying space to add humidity, so things aren't reacting, natural products aren't reacting negatively. Or in a climate like yours, you're dehumidifying,
yes,
to bring down that humidity.
You know what many pulmonary patients I have. And this is where I think it all has been so separate, but no, it comes together, that are like, oh, I have a humidifier, you know, da da da. And I'm like, girlfriend, we live in Florida. Have you checked the humidity in your home and it's building and you're using humidifiers? Like, you're expanding and you're just driving that bacteria. And then, you know, think about it, if you drop cannulas in places, right? You're just shoving that bacteria right into those nice, healthy lung spaces.
Yeah.
But so many people were using humidifiers for the longest time. So many of my lung patients, that alone could have been an entire separate educational, you know, topic. And I've been in with American Lung Association and with hospitals I worked at, and you do like diabetic management, like you do all of these little management educational seminars and stuff. I've taught a lot. And yeah, that it's the opposite. And I'm like, no, guys, even our sweat mechanisms here, slightly different. Our physiology, it's different based on where we go, where we live. Someone living in a high altitude versus we're sea level here. There's differences. Our physiology, as it should, it's supposed to respond to all of these things that we interact with. That is our body's job. It's our biological cellular functions. But we don't think about that if we just move somewhere, build somewhere, or maybe we are living somewhere and we rebuild somewhere else. I don't know anyone, I think that would even take that into consideration.
No, and I think that most people are not going to take that in consideration until they're there, and then they're realizing it. And from a home perspective, like we were talking about earlier, as a home buyer or someone building a home, you're just assuming that the builder already understands that.
Absolutely.
Building codes rarely address, they're going to address, you know, snow loads of how the roof must be designed, wind loads for shear, and things of that nature that are unique to the climate. But the indoor environment is just not even discussed, not even recognized. And if you don't know the right questions, or you don't think to ask those questions, you're just assuming.
Right.
Oh,
Would be a question now? You know, we're in this whole we've been in restorative phase of our home for years, and we've been the only homeowners. And that's the first question we get, right? Has anyone else lived here before you? Nope, just us, you know. What are some questions? Like, I had no idea. This was our first home, first family, right? So this is our first home. What an HVAC system was, right? Like, okay, I get AC and filters. Very basic knowledge of a homeowners, and we replace filters, right? But building a home, like, what is a question, young or old, no matter what stage I think you're at in home buying? What's just one or two questions someone can ask their builder?
yeah. So one of the things that I would encourage someone to ask is, what are your air sealing measures? Because if when you think about it from a shell, which is your four walls, your ceiling, and your floor, if there's penetrations throughout that shell, if you combine all those holes together, it could be equivalent to having your window open 24/7. And if you have all those porous areas, and you think of, it's reasonable to expect there's going to be multiple porous areas around the home, because it's assembled by hundreds or thousands of pieces of material nailed or screwed together.
Right.
Nothing about the shell of how that is assembled is designed to prevent holes. You know, maybe things you can see through. Obviously, if there's a hole in the sheathing that you can literally see through, that should be covered.
Right.
But it's all the little holes, and you know, contaminants from outdoors. When you think about your home as a system, your home is either pressurizing as the HVAC comes on and blows air, or it's depressurizing when you turn your range hood fan on, your dryer, your bath fans. And so every time your home depressurizes, it's sucking in through those porous areas around your home. And that could be opening for insects. It could be contaminants from outdoors, dust. One of the things our homeowners comment on is they're shocked at how little they have to dust. And so if you think about it, if dust can't get in, then other contaminants can't get in either. So how do they air seal? And if the builder can't answer that, he either doesn't do it at all, or he truly doesn't understand what that really is. Maybe he does air sealing. He requires his insulator to spray foam in the big holes.
Probably.
But if they're not addressing all the holes, then that's an issue.
Mm-hmm.
Air management is another huge thing. So the first thing is they have to get the envelope right.
Okay.
And that is paramount above all things. And then the next thing is air management. And most codes, even though codes are now starting to push as they elevate to the ERV or the HRV, which is a heat recovery ventilator or an energy recovery ventilator.
Okay.
And it's really fascinating technology, because if it's, like today here, I think it's 40, 50 degrees outside. When it's on, it's going to suck in that cooler air. It's 72 degrees in here. Well, when it's exhausting 72-degree air out, it's literally pulling that warmth out of the exiting air. So the air actually is being warmed back up just as it passes by the plates.
Okay.
So your air handler isn't having to work overtime to either heat that up or cool that down. It's just working its way back into the system.
Okay.
So the technology and equipment is very much advanced from what we've been used to in the past. The difference is how that system is operating. And so most of the systems are what I refer to as a dumb system, and not meaning dumb and it's stupid to use it.
Right.
Dumb that it's on a timer. It just push pulls at various times of the day to bring fresh air in and exhaust out your stale air.
Right.
In our homes, we have an air sensor. So 24/7, it's monitoring air quality.
Mm-hmm.
So you have Thanksgiving dinner, you have a cocktail party, somebody burns something, or something is off in the air quality in the room. It senses that, and it talks to that ERV and says, hey, you need to modulate up, bring in more fresh air so we can bring this down. So it's sensing VOCs, CO2, humidity, and I feel like it's 2 or 3 other elements to maintain indoor air quality at a state.
That's amazing. Why would you think that that's not bare minimum building code? Like, I mean, why wouldn't builders, is it just very expensive? They don't see the return on that investment in the upfront, even though they're not thinking about health either. Like, why just, yeah.
If I was to boil it down to one thing, I think that because our industry rewards on flash and what photographs well, most builders, and I'm not disparaging them, I would say they're running a business, and their business is functioning as traditionally all building businesses have. They're not looking forward to the livability and comfort of the home because it's not a priority.
Right.
And my belief system is, and I get encouraged every time I see a news story that says, or a post somewhere where data is showing that health and wellness is a growing concern among consumers.
Mm-hmm.
Because until consumers start showing up at open houses and meeting with builders and asking these questions, you will not drive an industry, because you have an industry that is already resistant to any change whatsoever. And so builders are not doing these little upgrades or making these little changes because their homes sell anyway.
Right.
So that's puts the onus back on the consumer that if their priority is health and wellness, like you, like me, like, you know, a lot of our homeowners are, those are the questions that you would be asking. And the ultimate verifier is if the builder is actually performing to those higher levels, is are they certifying their homes?
Right.
Because if they're not certifying their homes, they have no verification that any of best practices were followed, any of the air management requirements were followed. We have very stringent requirements that we have to meet. We certify 100% of our homes. So it's never the buyer or the client taking my word for it. Right. Yes, I'm passionate about it and I can get in all the nerdy details, but it's that certification that I hand off to them when they move in that validates everything that I told them.
Right. And I mean, we had, you know, quite an experience, but it also seems like the large residential developers, but they're, you know, larger, they're, you know, building so much and so quick. They're cashing these things out. People are buying regardless, like you just said, but they protect themselves. What I found out through my personal experience, they're protected. So it almost makes it harder for the homeowners to even ask these questions, especially once the home's already built. Obviously, that was our experience. We didn't even get to see our home go up. After discussing with our neighbors, they said, I think our home went up in like 45 days or something like that.
Yeah.
Yeah. So when you start finding these things out, it's like, well, of course we had problems. You know, there's no question about it. But when we started going down these roads, they were very much protected. Some developers, I don't want to speak for all of them, especially here in Florida, but they are protected and they keep a margin, if you will, like a little pot. And I actually found this out through my insurancer is who told me this. And like asked a simple question of like, well, did you know that, you know, your attorney or something like that works for your builder? So they know so much, like 10, 15, 20% of their homes are not going to be built to code. They know that. They kind of assume that responsibility already. So that's almost their, you know, investment right there, that they already assume and know that probability. Yeah. So they're going to take some of that and go ahead, hire some attorney company to go out now and represent and be like, oh yeah, you know, 5,000 because this wasn't built to code, you know,
Right.
All that, and come to find out that they were very much protected. And so it's like, even when you do ask the questions, and people may know or even may know about the health, it's at the bottom line, what is going to be done about it? So kind of like how you just said, it really does go back into the consumer hands at this point, you know, is gaining that insight, gaining education and the knowledge about it, asking these questions from the get-go. If we're going to talk about preventative care and health, and that's the thing about health too, the best thing you can do is try and work preventatively as best as possible as you're aging and growing up, right? Doesn't always work out that way, but so same thing with building a home. But yeah, these are very much protected. Goes back into the consumers, and same thing as your health is you're put in that position. And like you said from the very beginning of this video, is no one's going to care about it more than you and
100%.
Your partner or your spouse if you're all living in one place. So yeah, even so, being a home developer, a home buyer, these are great questions to ask. And then you get into situations where even asking those questions, they are protected. And these permitting, I mean, even when you kind of get into health care and you go to a doctor and you go, I'm sick from mold, you know, like I think the most doctors are going to be like, okay, like let's start over, or
Right.
they may shoo you out the door. It depends on who doctors, right? But yeah, working preventatively, but it's got to be, consumers have to take responsibility, have to get your education and knowledge, and also just your wallet is also the power. So choosing homes, like you were saying, and how I say it too, even again, going back to, I'm just translating over like a building to your body and the healthcare, right? Is people do love the aesthetic, and right, same thing about the body as well. But if you put that money into the investment, they will all come together. If you put that into the unseen ingredients of the house, if you you know, it will pay off. You may not see it directly, especially right, that instant gratification,
Right.
like buying that brand new home, but even going through remodeling, like that maintenance is, it's upkeep. That's maintenance. Your health is maintenance. It's an upkeep. Your house is maintenance. It's a huge upkeep.
Yeah. Well, and I, refer to, our business and, investments recognize ROI, return on investment. I have a very different spin on that from a home building. Yes, as a business, I have to focus on ROI too, or I wouldn't be in business.
Right.
But when you look at it from the aspect of what is my health, how do I monetize that? I look at things in a return on wellness, because regardless of your station in life, when you lose your health, in station meaning your financial situation, you will invest anything and come up with any angle you can to get that health back.
Right.
I went through my journey. Very little of what we did was covered in insurance. My wife and I didn't care.
Right.
And we were willing to do whatever it took to get me healthy. And so when you look at it from a home perspective, if you understand that you can upgrade your countertops, spend another 10 grand on a countertop, it's not going to move the needle on the value of your home at all. You still have a hard surface countertop. But air sealing measures like we do cost $1 a foot, a little over $1 a foot, to properly air seal that home super tight. The reverse osmosis unit is going to cost you maybe a couple, $2,000-$3,000, or a
That's
whole
a brainer for me. Water quality. I mean, like there's no amount of money when you understand how important.
when you understand, right? The same way that you look at the food you eat. I know that if when I buy grass-fed beef, it's going to cost more than the industrial beef injected with all sorts of garbage that it is in its state is illegal in multiple countries around the world.
Right.
And, dairy is the same thing. Grass-fed, pasture-raised organic eggs are more than the industrial eggs that wouldn't feed them to anybody. So those are justifications that you make for your health. And so if investing in a few of these elements that will improve the intake, your environment every single day, knowing that your home is helping you, not hurting you, that dollar amount is almost negligent in the big picture of what's truly important to you and your lifestyle and your family, and controlling that one thing you can control.
Oh yeah.
Is your terrain and your environment.
I mean, just the amount of money, if I just looked at just the healthcare expensive and I'll add in the like mold testings too into that, just to test for that, not even trying to clean and restore and have people, right? When you brought up so perfectly the pressures, right, in your house. Again, I translate it directly to the body. It's just how my brain works. It just happens automatically. Your lungs are the same way, right? They're pressurized. Okay. That's how lungs operate, is this pressured mechanism. air coming in and out. So, spores, everything gets into there. But anyways, when you were explaining it to me, that's how it directly, translates over. And I got totally way off topic. But oh my gosh, what were we talking about? See, I did trail off there.
Yeah, we were just talking about the justification of what is actually healthy for you.
So when I do it, well, just the mold testings, all this stuff, to circle back is, and I have written all this down and come to my husband and questioning, like, at what point is it just worth it to build new, but properly this time? I mean, I've had so many questions, the two of us back, and with contractors that are friends of ours, engineer, I mean, you name it. And it's just, we could have put a down payment on a piece of land at this point, started building, with the amount of out-of-pocket expenses just for testing in healthcare. To test for, for even me as the healthcare provider to just reach out, like, okay, you know what? I've had enough. I'm just going to put this amount of money. I've allotted this much for my health. It's what we're doing. And that's out of pocket, here in Florida, for a lot of those tests, especially if you don't have like a primary care or specialist that's really like, okay, let's do this, let's for this. Right. So, and again, insurance. So you're not even talking about homeowners insurance, healthcare insurance. But if I were to really compare, contrast, and all of that is, we could probably still build a brand new home at this point, and we're still doing work to our house. This is a brand new home. And I've always heard, again, we're young, like your home's never done. But it does make you question, well, if it was done the right way, though, it should be.
It should be. And I think that's, again, one of those misunderstood aspects, is if your home is truly done right at conception, why wouldn't it be done? You know?
Why are they ongoing? They shouldn't be.
The costs of the features that we prep our homes for in comparison to what you've spent are a fraction of that cost, and your husband wouldn't have had to go through the heartache, and you wouldn't have been feeling like you were completely crazy because you knew something was wrong.
And that was that really gets to your mental health, because you're experiencing it. You're living through that, and like how you were saying with you and your wife, that's a few months. Like, while you're going through that, you're still living right in that environment, still just breathing and soaking all of it in while you're trying to navigate this. And then even as a healthcare provider, working hand in hand with doctors, with their own patients. But when you become the patient, it's a different story,
Then it's real.
Yeah, absolutely. It really is. And it makes you feel absolutely crazy, especially because it is so invisible. Like you explain, even with the materials, and when we look at it cellularly, it's not something that just jumps out. You have to really assess. So when I started doing mitochondrial studies, this was a couple years ago, and I trained directly under Dr. Himal Patel. And I tested numerous of my own patients, and we do peer-to-peer other patients. And I don't know if you're familiar with Dr. Joe Dispenza and his practice. So the studies for his meditation, his niche, right, was used with mitochondrial studies. So I did the same thing in my practice. It's just meditation wasn't, or in his, I don't want to speak for his program, but his program, right, has studied specific things. So we're going under this training, peer-to-peer and all of this stuff, and everything is so individualized. You're speaking, and of course, I'm talking, like, I ask every patient your occupation, your exposures, right? Did you have water well? Like, where's your water source from? And my patients, even some doctors I worked with that, again, become my patients, like, why are you asking me this? And like your dental health, well, that toxicity burden, that total load is going to be a huge barrier into your success. So we need to kind of figure out, it's never just one thing, so we need to highlight all of these things that's going to help, right, get you to this place. But when we look at mitochondrial studies, you're taking all this person's information in and looking at how their cells, right, are interacting. And mine was so bad. And I mean, out of thousands of patients at this time tested, mitochondrial DNA tested, why a young, healthy female, like, ooh, that's bad compared to people that have strokes. Like I've tested my own patients that have had heart valve issues, strokes, all of these things, right? Mine was the lowest.
Wow.
The lowest. So we do this training, and I'm like, okay, we're going to bring mine up as this study case now, right? Right, I go through now the same assessment and interpretation like a patient would, have my DNA. And when you look at it, it's like, we knew, okay, it wasn't really something coming from the inside of the cell. When we look at ROS, reactive oxygen species, okay, that's a term a lot of people hear when we think about inflammation, mitotoxins, and all of this, right? So mine was actually very well balanced. I had not too much ROS going on compared to, again, a multitude of mitochondrial studies and all of this, and a database, what was actually seen like under the microscope, right? And so we determined through my assessments and everything that it really had to be something from the outside of this cell, because from the inside, my body's trying to do its best job in this homeostasis point, right? But I had a lot of proton leakage, oxygen leaking out, okay? And so when we look at that lipid barrier, okay, so when it stopped and we take it cellularly, right, and we drip, onto a cell and we said ATPase and we're going to stop this, and it still leaks. There's still this oxygen, if you will, leaking out. And there's a really good study. Think about water, right? And it's just dripping out because we have like a reserve, if you will. I was leaking. So we've come to this point. The doctor immediately was like, have you ever had like a toxicity test, an oats test, been tested for mold? Because it seems like it's more of something from the outside of your cell, right? Something attacking from the inside, rather than it being more of an internal thing, because ROS mostly is internally driven. It does exist from outwardly invaders, if you will, disruptor. But we determine, okay, something's like legitimately attacking your cells. So when we look at lipid membrane, so if we picture like a cell, we know, think polarity, positive, negative charges, diffusion, think lipid, like fatty lipids that repel each other, buoyancy, right? So picture this cell, and that is metabolism. That's how we, right? Oxygen, respiration. Well, that gets disrupted, that lipid membrane. So then we look at, well, what disrupts that lipid membrane? And right, well, we know fungi, bacteria, like we know this in the scientific world that happens. We know that disruption. Well, what else attaches to those cells? Testosterone, insulin, estrogen, right? Just to name a few, for example, thyroid. So when you have something that's coming in and disrupting that lipid barrier, right? You're going to see things like chronic fatigue, for example. That was one of my main symptoms. It didn't matter how motivated I was to exercise, how I exercised, if I got sick, I had no reserve at all. So come to find out, we did this toxicity panel, and there was like five, I would say 5 exposures that came back above the health threshold limit, right? The number 2 ones, one was like a flame retardant.
Interesting.
And so again, when we look at flame retardants, now I'm looking at, okay, that's definitely a cell disruptor. We know this, again, it's scientifically based. I know that. We know aspergillus is one of the larger fungi studied, if you will. So we know this. Well, now where's my exposure? Where's my source? And we just painted our house. And mitochondria, they're timekeepers, so they're, right, our cells, our biology, that's just, right, adaptation of all, that's cellular process. So mitochondria is like a little timekeeper, and they replicate, they die off, or hopefully not, replicate healthier ones and keep going, right? So they're little timekeepers of what you were doing, what your stressor was at that point in time. specifically, literally at that point in time. So when I did this mitochondrial test, that's literally was around, we were in the middle of this finding out process of, is there mold anywhere? Let's test our HVAC. And you don't realize too, at this time, you're just spreading spores everywhere. And
You are.
like you said, with this negative pressure in the house, right? But yeah, so that was the number 2 things that came back on my test were flame retardants and molds, various ones. And the highest one that came back from our mold test in our house was aspergillus. And we do have, there's scientific evidence. I have it in one of my books. I want to say the author is Yao. It's like YAW or YOW. Google it. Don't trust me on the spelling. So dyslexia might be there. But he goes into tons of different forms of parasites, organelles, right? There's fungi, there's bacteria, there's different families, species of these things. They all are disruptors, okay? Fungi, and they can cause cancer in someone. Autoimmunity, rheumatoid arthritis in someone else, especially if you have that hypersensitivity, allergies, right? And then that's where these signs and symptoms and things like asthma, pneumonitis, cancer, those things start coming into play. And we see that at the cellular level. So we saw it in healthcare, and it came back on our mold test. But I had no one put them together and put them on a silver platter. And my husband was going through his own journey completely separately.
Right.
So none of this, literally, I knew it, we were going through it. I was basically just fighting and advocating for it, thinking I was just crazy, right? Because that's pretty much what you get deemed to be.
Yeah.
No matter if you are a licensed healthcare provider or not. But yeah, and it came back and told my husband's pulmonologist, literally, that was the quote from his mouth when he discharged him. And I mean, he was intubated, a healthy young man, fit, exercising, and just goes down one day and was intubated in ICU and had a flare-up of pneumonitis. And so, yeah, your first question is, well, where did it come from? Because where does all of this come from? And then, of course, the number one thing is the home, the house.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
no, I think if people had a better understanding, a true appreciation of how important or how easily affected the cells, the mitochondria, everything about our body, how easily it can be affected by our environment. If they just had that heightened appreciation, I think there'd be a very different experience for people in their daily lives. And the problem, and I'm assuming you agree with this, is the medical world only addresses the outcome, the issue at the time, and does not educate. What you just described there, no one's getting that from their doctor.
Right.
The only doctors I've ever been to that wanted to know, like what you said, what's your occupation? What's going on in your life? Were my naturopaths. We're talking with them. They wanted to know, how did this get here? Not, here's a pill, here's a procedure, we're going to fix it, go on your way.
Oh, yeah. And I was talked down to by many doctors, CEOs too, because it takes time to ask these questions and get the answers, especially when I had veterans. Think about Ancient Orange. Okay. Yeah. It took over 20 years. So again, don't quote me on the time, but it took years. And I dealt with so many patients and other various causes. I mean, I have so many case studies, patients, hairdressers, think about the aerosols that you're breathing in, bird handlers, but the air quality, just even have birds as pets. People don't understand the health measures, that these decisions that we make impact the health. So your decision on your home is going to impact your mitochondria. Why these questions just like I guess we should be asking our developers, our contractors, these questions, health conscious questions to ask your developer, but health conscious questions to also ask your doctor as well.
Yeah. Yeah. And I get the whole aspect too. Our country is in a housing shortage. It's not a mystery. Everybody knows it. And so if somebody needs a home, they're relocating, they need to get a home because they got to get their kids in school. They don't necessarily have the luxury of I can wait for that right house.
Right.
But if you get a home, there are things that you can do to improve that environment. And obviously the ultimate way, like you said, hindsight, being able to build a home the right way so it would be ultimately done. It's not an ongoing project, but if you don't have that luxury of time on your hands and you are in a home, or you're now becoming aware as you're learning these things, you can improve your HVAC. You can add air sensor, to your main living area. You can improve your air filtration. We started prepping for reverse osmosis and whole home water softener and filtrations because I found out our homeowners were doing that on their own.
Yeah.
So our homeowners are very smart. They're very intelligent. They're very in tune to their health. They read labels. They're already making these health choices. And so if we were able to do little things that in big picture of the cost of the home, the cost is negligent for our costs.
Right.
But if we could tee things up where they were plug and play, they weren't product specific, vendor specific, but we made things easier for them to do post close, those little things. So I only bring that up because that's what we do as a home builder. But if somebody's buying a home, like our prior homeowners that we didn't make that preparation for, they still can add those systems.
Right.
They can still get purified water. They can still, have cleaner air and better air management in their home. Yes, it will be a little bit more because the home was already built a certain way and ducting was already done a certain way, but cleaning the duct system.
Yeah.
Most builders don't clean the ducts at all. And 10, 20 years down the road, you can only imagine what is sitting in that duct system that's getting recirculated through their home, regardless of what filter they have. That crap is still sitting in their ducts.
Yep. Yep. And then the water system. And that was, again, I was highlighted. I worked with a nurse that worked in the breast and prostate cancer department at Shands, which is the University of Florida school here in Florida. And they had programs with alkaline water, reverse osmosis, and going in, and they would go into their patient's home and install it at least into the kitchen sink.
Yes.
And at least for their drinking water, not to use the refrigerator water. I mean, gosh, even early in my career, when I was working with clients, but I was still in school, again, oncology patients, cancer patients, they would refrain from microwaves. So they wouldn't even have them built in their homes. I've just come across so many patients, but again, until you're the patient and a first-time home buyer, these things do just kind of roll off. You take them for granted, I definitely would say. It wasn't a wealth of knowledge, even just, I would say 5 years ago, let alone 10, 20 years ago. Absolutely not. But that, even again, I was already practicing, but that wasn't even I wasn't getting that in continuing education credits, about water quality.
No.
I was getting that by networking with other, healthcare professionals and everything. And just became friends with this nurse that worked in that program, and right. And then actually at the time, our dog was diagnosed with cancer, and I came home one day and I was like, no one else drink out of the fridge. We are no longer drinking out of this. We're getting our home filtered. And I am not kidding you when I tell you our dog's tumors went away immediately.
Oh my God.
Yes, he still passed away a few months later. So I would like to believe that we bought him some time. But at that time, the only thing we addressed was the water. And again, I was already suspecting this because I'm a blonde. When you start having like your hair change colors, and then again, like the county puts out little like blips of, hey, we added extra chlorine in your water, and you start seeing like yellowing in your plants, and then yellowing everywhere, and you're like iron and chlorine, you have like my physiology mind, right, is like something doesn't seem right here, right? And I was like, yeah, I literally came home, was like, we're putting in the water filter. And then that just starts to become something that I took in my assessment. And again, so many doctors and CEOs or the practice manager, whoever it was, is like, we have like a quota, right? Like your revolving door needs to go a little bit quicker. We don't have time for these patients to be sobbing and crying in here, because what was crazy is, I think similar to our stories, is the patients like in themselves almost knew. And so just by simply asking them the question of, hey, do you live on a well water city? Have you had your water checked at all? Have you had your pipes checked? Have you had your air quality checked? Do you check the air quality? Because Apple phones now check it. I mean, we had this education with my pulmonary patients, when you had poor air quality days, right? Your numbers are going down in your clinic. A lot of those pulmonary patients aren't coming out. They're staying home, using their humidifiers.
That's right.
A lot of education goes into air quality and pulmonary patients. When you start finally asking water questions, you see people's light bulbs go off of, oh my gosh, and then it sinks in. And again, I've had doctors myself that have been my own patients, and farmers, their own cattle and farms. And again, you think beef and all of this, and it's like, oh man, I didn't think about our farming practice. And here I am for metabolic health with this metabolic disease, and a farmer in Florida exposed to pesticides, right? All of this industrialized farming practices. And we're breathing, soaking it right in, building right along with it, but we're not protecting ourselves from it. But what is crazy is employees protect themselves most of the time, I think, when they're building.
Right.
And that's what I find is odd as well, is when people are remediating mold the professional way, certified way, right? They're wearing protected suits, masks, like a nurse would, right, in the hospital, right? They're wearing a mask, they're protected. Builders, most of the time, if they're doing it right, they're to code. So that's just another question, is like, but if they're building that way and you have fiberglass, right, and all of this, well, then why am I breathing that in? Why am I living in it?
There's just a disconnect. That's where I was kind of alluded to earlier, as far as with all the code updates, there's a disconnect between health and wellness and the interior environment to, building a home that they're just making sure it doesn't fall down in an earthquake or blow over in a windstorm, or they're just upgrading the equipment so it uses less energy. But health and wellness is seldom even discussed because it just isn't understood. And I think that's what frustrates me, is we live in a day and age where we carry around a supercomputer in our hand. So if anything was ever important to someone, they can literally research it by 100, 1,000 different ways.
Right.
And our industry doesn't care to do that research because their homes are still selling. And so we have a need for housing, but I feel like we have a desperate need for healthy housing. And until the consumer is educated enough that they're asking those builders those very pointed questions, nothing's going to move that needle in the housing industry, except for builders like myself that understand it and are already attracting that buyer that already makes health and wellness a priority in their life.
All right. So what is the certification that you speak of that you do? So what is something, so if, let's say I go to build a home, or someone watching this, what is that certification? So we work with and have worked with
the National Green Building Standard, NGBS. Their highest level is Emerald, so all of our homes hit the Emerald level.
Okay.
Dozer was one that we adopted here a few years ago, which is the Department of Energy's Zero Energy Ready. And that basically just means that every home is solar ready.
Okay.
So it's plug and play. You know, we have to provide a solar design to show if a homeowner wants it after the fact, they can buy a very specific size solar system, and all the installer does is put the panels on the roof, fish the wire, and they're producing solar.
That's awesome.
But within Dozer, you have to that the home must qualify for Indoor Air Plus, which is the indoor air quality aspect.
Okay.
We've recently adopted Wellness Within Your Walls. I gravitated to that one because it looks at the wellness of the home. It still requires you to meet all the other metrics of best practices and all that kind of stuff, but it focuses on the wellness, like, you know, how much natural light are you optimizing for the interior of the home?
Yes.
Are you creating a space for household chemicals to not be in the interior space? Are you creating a space for relaxation, meditation, exercise, unwinding? Do you have smart lighting that adjusts to circadian rhythms? You know, and then obviously the water purification and the air management and walkable communities. So it looks at the true wellness of the occupants in that home. And so it's a newer program for us. I just connected with it because of it's already speaking our language,
Right.
already the things that we were doing. And we were the only builder here in the Northwest that had that certification. So we kind of exposed that program to this area.
Absolutely.
But those certifications are where it pivots from taking the builder's word for it to third-party verification, confirming that all of this was truly done and met these certain metrics.
Right.
Because some certifications actually allow the builder to self-verify, or it allows the insulator to self-verify that they installed their insulation correctly.
Okay.
And it's not to assume that everybody's corrupt, but I personally wouldn't have trust in just taking someone's general word for it, because even if the insulator was a good guy,
Right.
if he's late to his son's soccer practice,
Mm-hmm.
he's going to say, yep, I did a good job. I always do a good job. And no one's looking over his shoulder going, did you really though?
We just ran into this issue. Yes.
So,
Like verbatim, pretty much. He was late to his son's soccer game.
yeah. So life happens and people get rushed for this or that. And our verifier, who does the energy modeling before we ever break ground, he verifies air sealing, duct installation, duct leakage or the HVAC insulation. He doesn't find it on every house, but he uniquely finds this or that.
Okay.
And he gives us a deficiency report. We email it to the trade affected by it. We require them to come back and fix it. But he's not looking at things in a rush to get somewhere else and to meet a schedule. The trades know, and that actually what helps too is these trades that install those various systems knows there's a third-party verifier that ultimately is going to be checking their work.
Right.
And they're going to be required to come back and fix it. So the expectation rises once they step across our curb to do various work, because it's not going to just be, oh, did you pass inspection? Yep. Okay, good. You're on your way. It's going to be, yeah, you passed inspection, but Jacob said you have to come back and fix this or that. Oh, okay, I'll come back. Well, then that costs them time and money to send the tech back. So they're being preemptive to make sure that certain check items are completed before they leave, so they don't have to make that drive back.
Right. Do you think do you call it eco-friendly green building? I know I hate terms as well. So
Yeah.
But would you say building this way certified, especially now with, you said wellness within walls?
Within your walls,
Within
yeah.
your walls. That's awesome. Does that take building, let's say if it's estimated 1 to 2 years, does that for your consumers, your clients, does that expand at all because of the way you build, like to additional years or time, or still kind of the foundations, as long as you know everything and you come in, like you said, presumptively, that the times really isn't altered that much of building a home more eco-friendly, if you will.
Yeah, it
Friendly.
definitely doesn't add time to the construction.
Okay.
So, granted, we're not going to build the home in 45 days, like a production builder who is just, pounding them out.
Right.
If I relate my schedules to other code-built custom builders, we're actually building at the same, in some cases, less time.
Wow. Okay.
Because we actually have everything planned out for efficiency before we ever start. So we energy model the home. Jacob tells us he knows our North Star that must be met for every home, and how the home's oriented, the number, the amount of glass. He will say, hey, you need to tweak this or that to still hit your score that you're trying to go after. We require that all the HVAC ducting be designed in advance so that we can make sure that there's no compromises in that layout during construction. So our industry is very routinely, it's how I actually learned when I started, is framing gets done and then the HVAC contractor comes in and then figures out where to put the ducting. So that doesn't mean that ducting is going to go in the most efficient way to operate the system. It's just going to go where it can actually get through the framing. Well,
that's what we found out was our HVAC system, that the way it was put in was just really not
yeah. That's actually very common, sadly, because the industry is designed around its focus now is what is the performance of the air handler and the condensing unit? Is it an efficient? What's the minimum efficiency? Did it meet that? Yes. Does it blow air into every room? Yes. Okay, approved. So we pre-design the system into the home and make sure that the framing will accommodate all that efficient pathways. And then the ducting is actually tested for leakage so that the air that the air handler pushes is getting to its intended locations without leaking into all other areas. So those are the little things that are planned up front so that when we actually do send the train down the tracks, HVAC rolls up, all their access points are there, they install, they're in and they're out. They're not standing there calling us going, hey, there's a beam right there. What are we supposed to do? I'll create a soffit or go underneath of it, put some more 90s in it. Well, you could have the most efficient equipment on the market, but if the ductwork is installed inefficiently, it's fighting itself every minute that system is operating. And the only person that's having to pay the price for that because it passed inspection is the homeowner. The system's working harder, so it's losing its lifetime, it's shortening its life cycle, and it's simply not operating efficiently. That's when you end up with the room in the back of the house. It's never warm in the wintertime, and it never cools down in the summer because there's not efficient airflow through that home.
Primarily in one room. It's like, this room's always freezing. Why? Yeah.
So that's why.
Yeah. And it's, we went through it. So, and then, unfortunately we had to go through it to know so much that we know now. There is like a curse that comes with, I think, knowing too much. And then what you then allow what's allowable at that point. And you're like, I can't just sit and just keep breathing this in, we need to do something. And we had AC handler, right? And well, you need the new AC unit and all the things. And then somebody like, we're just going to spray down your HVAC. We're just going to spray it in there. I'm like, oh my gosh, don't blow my house up. Like, but just, and especially if any viewers from this, just stress the importance of, you were just saying that the air, the quality, and how just building it from the get-go, how important the circulation in your home is, because that is your nose's job. When you're breathing all that in, where do you think that fungi, that aspergillus, these bacterias in your dust, right? Like, where do you think that's going to go? And you're just and two, I had throughout, I can't even tell you how many contractors we've had in our home, but one of them, because we had someone drop off the like construction sized HEPA filter air purifiers. That's what we got running in our homes now. When they found out what happened to my husband, he came, dropped them off, was like, here, like, run these all the time. And even when you're vacuuming, no homeowners even know, like, right when you're HVAC and it's running and you're vacuuming, you're just redistributing.
You are.
And that was new news to me. You know, even no matter how health conscious you are, just you don't think about how important the air is that you breathe. And yes, that the home you live in could most definitely be impacting how you're feeling.
Yeah. I mean, the question that everybody should ask themselves is my home helping my health, improving my health, or is it quietly hurting me every day? Is it undermining my health?
Yeah.
And I would say that if most people took the time to test their home, sadly, I would say that most people would learn that their home is quietly and slowly hurting their health.
Yeah. Because
they don't know what they don't know.
Absolutely. They don't know what they don't know. And that, I will personally, it was our case. And we lived through it, and even knowing what we did know, you know, but there was still more to know. There was still way more to find out and prove. And it's there, it's very hidden. It's not right. Like a nice, pretty house is so apparent and flashy and in your face. Health isn't in your face. It's not instant gratification by any means. You don't get sick usually overnight. You know, you're breathing this stuff in for a little bit before, right, your body starts really feeling it, because we have reserves. Our body is built with reserves. But if we're already pre-depositioned somewhere, whether it be age, family history, you already had an illness or two going on, which most people have multiple things kind of coexisting, right?
Mm-hmm.
Even in our children, like, we have young children. I think anyone that has young children, and like you just said, your home, is it hindering you or is it helping you? And when you have young children, it's like, oh my gosh, like their home is supposed to be the safest place for them. And it's like, not only just safe of security, do I have alarms on and all of it? Do I have security cameras? Is the air that they're breathing at night.
Mm-hmm.
And how do they feel? And when you are going through all of your children's health, your health, I had no doctor ask me, you know, even functional doctors, again, until we went through my individual mitochondrial tests, because even then, all the other things, like, she's a pretty young, healthy woman. But when my cell was put into my microscope, then it was like, well, wait a second. Like,
yeah, wild.
Her cells are really running hard right now just to even survive. And he asked me when he goes, how do you feel? And I go, how you just described it, of like, my cells are on overdrive. How am I surviving? That's how I feel. I literally feel that, so fatigued.
Yeah.
I'm like, I kept telling my therapist, people, like, I feel like the Energizer Bunny all the time, but that reserve is like slow-mo, if that makes any sense.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, so to be able to see that even cellularly was just like, but we know this though. So why is no one doing anything about it? And so when I came across you, Tony, and your company, it was like, wow. And usually it is Washington, Arizona, those states typically are, I don't want to speak for the whole state of Florida over here, but I will say just I've been practicing almost 20 years. So by trends, Florida usually comes after like Texas, California, and Washington and Oregon. We typically do come after the health. Do you find in those states people are health conscious over there? I feel like they are already health conscious as opposed to over here. I wouldn't say we're not health conscious by any means, but it's definitely not treated as like, right, this luxury or anything like that. It's its own like little separate lane as of right now.
Yeah.
Environment, health. I think you can see it differently just by people that are outside walking. In Arizona, you're going to see that health measures completely different in Arizona compared to Florida, let alone the building and developing.
Right. Yeah. No, I mean, the Northwest, Oregon and Washington, I mean, it's a health is, because of the outdoors, all the outdoor activities, people move here for that reason. So I think that everybody has some level of health consciousness.
Mm-hmm.
But as far as making it a priority, I think it's still a smaller segment of the market.
Right.
Like I had said earlier, I am encouraged by seeing information come out where health and wellness is a growing awareness. And I think that the more that continues to grow, I think, bless you, I think we'll start to see more of the needle turn for consumer choices. In Arizona, yeah, I mean, there's their health. I mean, that's why the snowbirds are down there. There's lots of wellness, and that's one of the reasons we're looking to, start building down there, is I feel our product will do very well there because of its focus.
Absolutely.
Because of the environment there.
Well, hopefully one day you'll come to Florida.
No,
I'm gonna put it out there, Tony.
You just throwing it out there? Yeah.
Just throwing it out there. One day, 5-10 years from now,
Yeah.
I'm gonna save money to start building a home.
Well, come on out to Arizona.
My husband honestly would love to. He's always talked about if he's ever moved anywhere, he would most likely end up either in Arizona or the Carolinas. That's always what he said.
Right. Okay.
Unfortunately, I've gotten altitude sickness a couple of times in Arizona.
Really?
I have. Yeah, I am very, right, how people can be very hypersensitive to what they breathe in. I mean, still the same thing, right? Lungs are negative pressurized. And it's not crazy elevation. But yeah, my body, I feel very off.
Oh, interesting.
Flying into Arizona, very bad in Colorado. I kind of stay away from there. But yeah, my physiology is very hypersensitive. So when I go to different elevations, I feel it. My body feels it while we're there. So I'm the reason he can't.
You're a sea level gal.
I am a sea level gal. I will stay in Florida. We traveled, and that's where I've experienced, unfortunately, the altitudes, like, how I respond, but that's physiology. And that is what I love so much and passionately. And just thank you for speaking with me, because these are, as a physiologist, metabolic specialist, these are things that are so unseen. And you nailed it when you talk about, behind the walls, the materials that we're using. And they're not up front. They're not the pretty and flashy things that you see in such a beautiful home, which I've seen your work. I think they're beautiful homes. To me, they're beautiful and aesthetic, but I understand what you mean, especially with marketing and social media, of that aesthetically pleasing template, if you will. But tying in your environment and your home, because it is so important. Usually if you're not working, you're at home.
Yeah,
Right. So
exactly.
that's where most of your time is spent. It's supposed to be your safe haven or with your family. You should be able to rest and recuperate. This is the environment to do it. But when you have things that are constantly in your home that you're exposed to, that you shouldn't really be exposed to, that it gravely impacts your health down to a cellular level. There is science on it. We've both, unfortunately, with our family members, have experienced it
Mhm.
on other levels. And then now I think, both agree on getting this information out, that
Absolutely.
this knowledge is power. Whether it's something that you work in the industry or not, questions to be asking your developer and your doctors, and that this should be one cohesive environment.
Mhm.
We're all just trying to get along. Like I said, I took that from Dr. Himal Patel. I can't take credit for it. That we are trying to get along, but how important your home environment is. If I was a developer, I would be building that way in Florida and all over the nation right now. Like, why isn't this to code? And making health almost like the healthcare model and that, I guess, construction model, if they aligned
Yeah.
easily, I think it would be great for everyone. I would put my life on it that I bet we would see differences in diseases, especially metabolic diseases. They are most definitely driven by our environment. It is scientifically backed. We know this.
Mhm.
It's just not treated that way.
Yeah. I mean, I think what we're trying to change the conversation is that, health and wellness shouldn't be a luxury. It
It should just be.
should be just what, like, when your expectation is when you bought your new home, it should just be new and healthy. And that truly should be the standard. Shouldn't be a luxury. It shouldn't be something you have to ask your builder to do. It should just be part of the process.
Absolutely. When I was building healthcare plans, it literally was including water practices and water filtration systems, lighting sunlight into someone's house, or just stepping outside, whatever that looked like in a lifestyle. Your home is very much your lifestyle, right? And your environment. And that was going into healthcare plans. Hey, outside of all of this, and I know we talked about medication and supplements too, but we're also going to add, some environmental things that we can work on. And many doctors, obviously, that appreciated it. And then, right, that's how I developed referral relationships with them, and they refer their own family members to me, their own patients to me. And it's great to educate and bring insight to things that are known, but need to be more maybe widely known. and
Yeah, for sure.
and not sold as a luxury, not marketed as a luxury. And that's where I developed even my business model is health shouldn't be a luxury. You shouldn't have to pay me money to tell you to fix your water, to clean it up, that it's really not the best for you and your air quality. And really to provide you all this education was so much of my job. That's part of, I guess, treating people and testing. And my job is to analyze and interpret responses, right? Bodily responses. That's physiology and metabolism. That's my specialty. And
Mhm.
so when you start seeing what those responses, what's causing them, or the barriers to the responses, if you will, the lack of response, that's a whole healthcare model in itself.
Yeah.
Is that. And yeah, that shouldn't be a luxury. You shouldn't be paying someone to build your home that already should have been built and trusted, right, in good faith, to just build it well and good. But also, yeah, like when you go to a doctor, you trust you're in their best interest.
Mhm.
They're going to tell you every wealth of knowledge that you have, but that shouldn't be a luxury. You shouldn't have to pay a special price to a special doctor or functional medicine provider to tell you it's your air, it's your water, maybe the foods that you're eating. And you know that we do get mold in our food, so let's practice food hygiene. It's so much education.
Yeah.
And that shouldn't be a luxury.
No, I agree.
So I appreciate the conversation with me today. Do you have any questions for me, even like metabolically, mitochondria wise, that I can answer for you?
No, I think I feel like you and I could keep talking for another couple hours.
I know we could.
I think the one question that I had that I wanted to ask you, we touched on it a little bit about, you know, guidelines versus federal guidelines versus health official, you know, expectations.
Right.
And as you learned, your home had below what was considered federal guidelines for mold content or whatever the terminology.
Mm-hmm.
But your husband's reaction, your reaction was that it was still too high.
Yep.
And I feel like, and it's understandable that the typical consumer sees federal guidelines as guidelines that if it's below this, then therefore it must be health. But our bodies tell a very different story, which you learned through your own journey. And what advice would you give to people that are using those as benchmarks of health and safety instead of paying attention to their body? Like we had talked about water, you look at EWG and what's allowed in our water systems. Health official guidelines have some things 4,000 times higher than what they recommend, but the federal guidelines say that it's healthy.
Right.
And so what advice would you give for someone that's using that as their benchmark?
Well, I think the advice given is let's just really be open about these benchmarks. Because I mean, blood pressure, even since I've been in college and out of college now, 20 years, the benchmark per se, even for what's considered hypertension and blood pressure, has changed.
Mm-hmm.
So I think consumers in general, no matter where you're at across the board, is to just be open-minded of what we may read in a textbook or as a benchmark, that doesn't necessarily a clear pinpointed answer.
Yeah.
For everyone, that we should all, as a doctor, as a developer, as someone who enforces codes, is we should all be open that benchmark maybe can change. It can change for a group of people, one outlier, you know. And that's the thing is science, and just like marketing, supply and demand, it doesn't move with one outlier, right? But who's to say that one outlier's life isn't valuable?
Exactly.
So I really think when we look at benchmarks, the advice is to just, I would think the broader thing is to, I guess, just stay open to that benchmark. It doesn't tell you everything, and especially health. We all have our own, you know, subjective and objective response to what even health is to us.
Mm-hmm.
So who is to say, like we said in the beginning, no one's going to care about your health more than you. So why would you let a benchmark or someone else put that benchmark on your health?
Well said. Yeah, very true.
And so that's where I lead with, and kind of how I talk with other doctors as well, especially if it's a cardiologist. And that blood pressure one really, comes to drive because it has changed. And when we look at heart rate variability, it's so different. What's low for someone like, oh man, they're 90/60. Well, they're athletic, they're in shape, so it's fine. So it's okay for the benchmark to move. We know the benchmark in some scenarios move. So why not in an instance when we're looking at funguses bacterias and these things that we know are harmful, why wouldn't a developer or a doctor, someone building the home, wanting to pay you to build their home, why wouldn't we want to be open to understand that can move, that can change? I might be the outlier. My son might be the outlier.
Yeah.
And is that worth it? And then you just need to ask yourself, is that worth it?
Mm-hmm. No, well said. That's good. Hopefully people will take that to heart.
Hopefully. I think people like you and I, we get so passionate about it. You're like, I can lead you to the water trough, but I can't make you drink from it. Even if I get a straw, I still can't make you drink from it. So yeah, I do hope from this video, thank you so much. It only takes a kernel. So if they get something out of this, more questions that maybe, because I could talk to you all day. Maybe we do another one. Maybe hopefully it opens up some more questions for us to consider as well.
Yeah.
And home buyers and those wanting to build their own home. I think a lot of people are, because of this becoming to light, more people are looking to build their own homes and have a say in this stuff. If they want to say in their health, they want to say in how their home's built.
Yeah. No. Well, I would look forward to it if another opportunity exists.
Absolutely. Well, thank you, Tony, for your time today. Thank you, Nate. I will send this over to you guys. And hopefully, like I said, we get great feedback, and whatever questions we can gear them up and gear up for another one.
Hey, perfect.
All right.
You have an amazing day.
You too, Tony. Bye.
Bye.